Just as little is there present in conscience that fluctuating uncertainty of consciousness, which now places so-called pure morality outside of itself into another holy being and takes itself to be unholy, but then again places so-called pure morality within itself and the connection of the sensuous with the moral in that other being. 636 is a very short paragraph. It really just could have been tacked on to the end of 635 because it's not really adding all that much. But let's look at it and see what Hegel is reinforcing here. He says, just as little is there present in conscience. Conscience is Gewissen, right? That fluctuating uncertainty of consciousness. And that uncertainty, Ungewissheit. So he's playing off of this term here a little bit of Wissen, right? Knowledge, knowing. And he's saying there isn't any such uncertainty here in conscience, which now places so-called pure morality outside of itself into another holy being and takes itself to be unholy, but then again places so-called pure morality within itself and the connection of the sensuous with the moral in that other being. What do we have there? Well, we have another one of the antinomies or contradictions that came to light as the moral consciousness was trying to make sense out of itself and how it could possibly understand, fulfill, embody morality, right? And so that distinction between a holy being in which morality somehow exists and it's not us and we're like, these unworthy maggots compared to it, and the fact that morality also exists in us, and there isn't any such beyond being, that's just another antinomy to be overcome. That's another set of moments that Hegel would say have to be incorporated into conscience. And in a certain way, you could say that this is one of the dangers, actually, of conscience. It makes us into that holy being, and it tells us that we're definitely on the right track in the action that we are choosing to do, which then transforms reality or produces a new reality through the action, through the actualization, the Verwirklichen of what it is that we're choosing to do, whatever interest we're being motivated by. And that's reading a little bit more into this passage, but, it makes sense to do so, and it helps to contextualize why he's setting aside this almost throwaway remark in this single paragraph. It renounces all these attitudes and dissemblances connected with the moral view of the world when it renounces that consciousness which thinks of duty and reality as contradictory. According to this latter view, I act morally when I'm conscious of performing only pure duty and nothing else but that. This means, in fact, when I do not act. But when I really act, I am conscious of an other, of a reality which is already in existence, and of a reality I wish to produce. I have a specific purpose and fulfill a specific duty in which there is something else than the pure duty which alone should be intended. Conscience, on the other hand, is awareness of the fact that when the moral consciousness declares pure duty to be the essence of its action, this pure purpose is a dissemblance of the truth of the matter, for the fact is that pure duty consists in the empty abstraction of pure thought and has its reality and its content only in a specific reality, in a reality which is the reality of consciousness itself, and consciousness not as a mere thought thing, but as an individual. As for conscience itself, this knows that it has its truth in the immediate certainty of itself. This immediate concrete self-certainty is the essence of the action. Looking at this certainty from the point of view of the antithesis of consciousness, the content of the moral action is the doer's own immediate individuality, and the form of that content is just this self as a pure movement, that is, as the individual's knowing or his own conviction. We have a far more substantive discussion here in paragraph 637, which reveals to us the contrast between conscience, which is going to be something individual, but allowing for actual action, actualizing action, you might say. And that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, the previous shapes of the moral consciousness, which wound up foundering in a kind of mixed up state of dissemblance. So here Hegel tells us that conscience renounces all these attitudes, all these stances and dissemblances connected with the moral view of the world when it renounces that consciousness which thinks of duty and reality as contradictory. Now, is this just sort of bootstrapping? Is this sort of, positive thinking? You look at things that appear to be contradictory and you're like, there's no contradiction there. Or is this trying something out? Actually seeing whether the contradiction is there, that you think is there, by acting. So Hegel tells us, according to the latter view, the consciousness that thinks of duty and reality as contradictory, I act morally when I am conscious of performing only pure duty and nothing else than that. And then that means that, I am moral, I am conscious of performing pure duty only when I do not act. And that seems paradoxical, if not contradictory, because the whole point of having a duty is you're supposed to do the duty, right? It's something that you owe, it's something that you must fulfill. And if there's no concrete, real, wirklich, right, actual action, handeln, tat, however you want to frame it, in terms of the German terms that Hegel uses, if you're not actually doing something, if you're not acting, then how the hell are you going to be moral? So you're kind of in a catch-22. If you act, you're immoral. If you don't act, well, you're not immoral, but then you are immoral, right? So that's a problem. Now, Hegel points out, when I really act, I am conscious, now notice the term that he brings in here, of an other. There is an other who is haunting this. Just a few paragraphs back, I pointed out that this is a section where Hegel is talking about moral self-consciousness, right? And self-consciousness always involves a reference to an other. So when I really act, and it's a beautiful phrase, right? Ich wirklich handle, right? When I do an action, handeln, and I really do it, I actually do it, I bring it into actuality, then what happens? He says, I'm conscious of an other, of a Wirklichkeit, a reality that is already in existence, and I'm also conscious of what's not yet there, but what I'm trying to bring about, a reality that I wish, I choose, I commit to produce. So we have an other who's not yet a subjective other, but at least an other that is not me, what it is that I'm acting upon, and I'm trying to transform that into something else. And, if you say, well, I really act, I wirklich, I actually act, right, is acting in reality, on reality, through reality, transforming reality. So if we think about this in terms of duty, he says, this means that I have a specific duty, something that is actually conditioned, that exists as a requirement for me in the world that I could fulfill. A specific duty, he says, I have a specific purpose and fulfill a specific duty in which there is something else other than the pure duty which should be intended. And at that point, the moral self-consciousness would say, aha, see? You are self-interested. You are doing something conditioned by your inclinations, your desires, your wish for happiness, your determination to make the world look like what you want it to look like. And conscience would say, yeah, damn right I am. Because what you have to offer me over here on the other side is empty abstract. There's no purchase here. And I do have to have something that I can actually make real. So he goes on and he says, conscience is awareness of the fact that when the moral consciousness declares pure duty to be the essence of its action, now I'm going to stop there for a second and just repeat that. Conscience is awareness of the fact that when the moral consciousness declares pure duty to be the essence of its action, and we could end that sentence by saying moral consciousness is lying to itself and lying to conscience and lying to the subject of it. It's trying to pass something off as not being the case, namely what conscience is actually bringing to the table, and it's trying to present a false case to us. So it says, this pure purpose is a dissemblance of the truth of the matter. You could say, well, what is a dissemblance of the truth? Isn't that kind of a pleonasm? Dissemblance by itself is already non-truth, isn't it? Well, yes, but what is dissemblance? Dissemblance, Verstellen, right, is when you are putting you're not just like totally lying, you're putting something in place of the truth as the truth, and you're blocking the path to the truth. In this case, the truth of action that conscience makes possible. Moral action. Not just action like, I'm waving my hands. Action that is genuinely meaningful for human beings and is right or good or what we ought to do. So he goes on and he says, how do we know this? The fact is, pure duty consists in the empty abstraction of pure thought. It has its reality and its content only in a specific reality. A reality which is the reality of consciousness itself. So this is a key part of the dissemblance. We project out there this pure duty or purpose, but a duty or purpose can only genuinely exist in a conscious being. And that conscious being's relation to other things, including other conscious beings. Or we could say the totality of the universe, or whatever. But you don't get moral consciousness without having a consciousness, and that means an individuality. You can say, of course, we share a consciousness in general of moral truths, right? We can talk in language back and forth about what's right and what's wrong, or what's good or bad. Yes, there is a kind of intersubjectivity there. Yes, there is an objectivity there. But if I'm going to do something, I have to do it. If you're going to do something, you have to do it. If somebody's going to do something, I mean, think back to all these problems where everybody just kind of looks at each other like, who's going to act? Everybody stands around and does nothing. Until we can actually say, listen, I'm going to be the one to do something, nobody will act. If we wait around for, pure consciousness to find its pure duty motivated by its pure purpose, then nothing is ever going to happen except for us sitting around jibber-jabbering about that, right? So conscience allows us a way past this seeming aporia. So he says, we have a reality which is the reality of consciousness itself. Consciousness not as a mere thought thing, but as an individual. As for conscience itself, he says, this knows that it has its truth in the immediate certainty of itself. So we have conscience and we have self-certainty, right? And this is where so often, right, the Hegelian dialectic picks itself up. Because once we have self-certainty, start looking for truth and start looking for the discord between the two of them. We're not there yet, but that's going to start happening soon, isn't it? So he says, it knows it has its truth in the immediate certainty of itself, this immediate concrete self-certainty. I know who I am and what I'm doing. Even if I can't, give you a complete narrative or tell you everything about myself, and sometimes I'm a little confused about what exactly I'm doing or whether it's right or wrong, but I can at least have the feeling of self-certainty, that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm fulfilling a duty, a specific duty, with a specific purpose. And I can say, yes, it is specific, but that's okay because it has to be because I'm an individual. So Hegel goes on and he says, this is the essence of the action, looking at this certainty from the point of view of the antithesis of consciousness. The content of the moral action is the doer's own immediate individuality, and the form of that content is just this self as a pure movement, as the individual's knowing, or as his own conviction, his own being convinced, Überzeugung, of what it is that he is doing. So the content of the moral action is the doer's own immediate individuality, which they are using to change things. The form of that is the self as a pure movement. It's what they know. And you notice that Hegel speaks in very cognitive terms about the action that we're engaging in, but he's quite right. When we do things, generally we're aware of doing them, and if we want to say that we're doing the right thing, we really ought to be able to identify the action that we're engaged in, and that is a knowing of that action, is it not? Looking more closely at the unity of the moral consciousness and at the significance of its moments, we see that it regards itself as the in itself or essence, but as conscience, it apprehends its being for self or itself. The contradiction of the moral consciousness resolves itself, that is, the difference which lies at its base proves to be none, and it runs away into pure negativity. But this precisely is the self. A simple self, which is both a pure knowing and a knowledge of itself, is this individual consciousness. Consequently, this self constitutes the content of what was previously the empty essence. For it is actual, a self which no longer has the significance of being a nature alien to the essence and with laws of its own independent of it. As the negative, it is the difference within pure essence, a content, and one too, which is valid in and for itself. (638) is really just running over the same ground as the previous paragraphs, but it does reinforce what is being brought out about conscience and about the importance of individuality, concrete individuals, in this section. So Hegel begins by saying, looking more closely at the unity of the moral consciousness and at the significance, the meaning of its moments, which it's finally recognizing as moments, right? We see that it regards itself as the in itself, the an sich, or as essence, as Wesen. So it does grasp itself in some sense, right? The individual is able to make sense out of themselves as moral consciousness, but it's a contradictory consciousness because these moments are never really brought together in any sort of full unity, and it's got its own self sort of dragging behind that it has, well, how does this fit into these contradictory moments? We saw that dissemblance is not going to get itself out of that. Conscience offers us a different path to tread. So he says, as conscience, this moral consciousness is now transformed. We have a new gestalt, as we pointed out, right? A new shape of consciousness, a new shape of moral consciousness, a new shape of morality as something that is conscious of itself in the individual, in the conscience. And he says that it apprehends its being for self or self. Notice that he doesn't say it grasps itself as for itself. He talks about it actually grasps its für sich sein. So he's not just saying it's für sich, for itself. He's saying that it has being for itself, and that it is able to apprehend that being for itself as its own self, as its selbst, right? No longer as a Wesen, but as a self. It has a picture of who it is. It understands itself in certain ways. This is not, radically new. We've had spirit, self-consciousness, taking all these stances on, well, who the hell am I? I'm the noble consciousness. I'm the person who follows the law of the heart. I'm the person who is engaging in observing reason. I'm the master. I'm the slave. I'm the stoic. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that, right? At this point in time, it's taking up a individuality that has its own content, not supplied by any of those previous shapes, and it's turning to the world and saying, I'm going to do some things. I'm going to choose which path I take, and I'm certain of it. So he goes on and he says, the contradiction of the moral consciousness, we're returning back now to the earlier moral consciousness, resolves itself. It dissolves itself, right? Auflösen. The difference which lies at its base proves to be none. What's the difference that lies at its base between all these different sides of the antinomy, like between happiness and morality, or between nature and duty, or between, a holy will and my actual will that morality has to be in? We could go on and on and on. All of these turn out at this point in time to be differences that aren't really differences, that don't make a difference. Why not? There's really two reasons. One is they lead us into these crazy antinomies that, leave us unable to figure out what morality actually is and how we comport ourselves in relation to it, how we act. But also because it produces a sort of paralysis, which is, again, one of those antinomies. I can't act. If I do, I'm immoral. But if I don't act, I'm immoral. How the hell am I going to be moral? I have to be moral, right? It's like an endless, crazy talk running through one's head. And that can't be where spirit ends. If it is, then we could end the book right here and say, well, we did all this progression, we got to the morality, and morality has these antinomies, and they're crazy, and if we try to live them out, we'll go crazy. And then, we wind up with interesting readings that, would be like a certain caricature of post-structuralism, wouldn't they? Right? Let's go back to the Hegel, though. So he says, the contradiction of moral consciousness resolves itself. The difference proves to be none. It runs away into pure negativity. Now, pure negativity is not necessarily a bad thing for Hegel. Pure negativity is also a capacity to sort of wrap itself around anything. Pure negativity is openness. Pure negativity is the self, which can take in all these things that it is not. This is not anything new, right? We talked about this way, way back in the consciousness and self-consciousness section. So pure negativity. It's a simple self, he says, which is both a pure knowing and a knowledge of itself as this individual consciousness. A Wissen, right? Gewissen, conscience, is coming from Wissen. I know who I am. I know what I need to do. I know what I'm going to do. And I know what I'm going to do it in and what I'm going to transform. And I know it in part because it's a task ahead of me. And now I know it as I'm doing it. And now I know the result because I'm the one who brought about the result. Right? So there's this relation of knowledge there. He goes on and he says, this self constitutes the content, Inhalt, something that's actually there, of what was previously the empty essence, the empty Wesen, because it's actual, it's wirklich. It has a place in the world. I've done something. I accomplished a deed or a duty. So he says, it's a self which no longer has the significance of being a nature, alien to the essence and with laws of its own independent of it. Why? As the negative, it's the difference within pure essence, a content, and one too which is valid in and for itself, which has validity both an sich and für sich. So at this point, things look pretty good, don't they? We're sounding like conscience is really the way out of all of these crazy antinomies of morality that we plowed our way through in the two previous sections. We still have a bit more development yet to go in this notion of conscience. You could say we're climbing the hill and then we're going to get a good look and see whether things turn out to be quite so rosily optimistic as Hegel's making them out to be at this point. But we're actually moving quite well through this. We've gone from the moral consciousness now to an individual conscience that we could all identify with, right? I'm conscience, you're conscience, and so is that person down the street. The only question is, are we true to ourselves as conscience, or can that question even arise at this state of self-certainty? And remember, there's a dialectic in Hegel constantly between self-certainty, this self-assertion, and then something beyond that that would be truth.